What is up, good people? Jungle Inc. here. Hope you're doing well. We got a lot of good stories today. We're going to talk about, is the SEC thinking about going after staking, claiming that that's some sort of security offering? Now, David Schwartz says that makes no sense, and while I agree with him, I think that's exactly what they're going to do. We'll talk about Ripple, their XRP escrow. Does it still make sense in the modern era? Is it causing us more bad press than it's worth? Charles Hoskinson stopped by an XRP Twitter space, and he went head-to-head with Scam Detective. And I got to tell you, I was a little bit disappointed with Scam's performance there. I thought he got run over a little bit. He could have done better. We'll talk about that discussion. Really fascinating. Anthony Pompliano, he was on CNBC fielding some pretty difficult questions here. You know, if Bitcoin is a hedge, how is it also a risk-on asset? Things like that. I think this idea applies to crypto in general as well. We'll play a clip, talk about that. Vitalik Buterin, they're planning on doing a purge of a lot of the history of the Ethereum network. Is this a good idea? Does this make sense? We'll discuss. And lastly, I got a clip that talks about our chances to have a soft landing here, what that may look like. Let's go ahead and get into it. So, Molly Elmore, she put up this post about how the SEC is likely or could, classify staking as a security offering. And David Schwartz commented on the post and said, this makes no sense. No one actually invests in staking. And if the coins themselves are not securities, what are we actually saying here? But I would tell you to take a look at the Terra ruling there. Now, this could just be a one-off bad ruling. No one knows. But we see the title of the article here. Federal courts hold Terraform crypto assets are securities, including stablecoin, when in combination with related yield protocol. So we're going to work through this. Now, the one thing I'll tell you is the facts and circumstances of every, specific coin or yield-bearing setup is different and would have to be examined by the courts. But I think off of this ruling, this is the SEC's best chance here, because if they could somehow get multiple rulings that staking, especially on-chain staking, is some sort of security offering, well, it's all over Red Rover. That would at least give them most of the crypto space. In the modern era, the great, bulk of cryptocurrencies are proof of stake. They're not interested in going after Bitcoin. I don't think they could, even if they wanted to. They went after Ripple and they didn't get the result they wanted. XRP is free to trade. So those are two specific types of crypto that are devoid of this mechanism for pooling your assets, pulling your funds together, earning a profit. Might they pivot to proof of stake? I think that's what they're thinking, especially after this. We see UST and Luna, crypto assets deemed securities under Howey in the newest New York federal court decision. A stablecoin that not independently a security may become one when coupled with a related yield protocol. Courts rejected the distinction made in SEC versus Ripple between crypto assets purchased directly from an issuer and those purchased on the secondary market. So in this court case, Judge Ratcliffe was like, okay, yeah, that's a great ruling for Ripple, maybe XRP, but that doesn't just, blindly apply. We're going to look at the specific facts and circumstances here, and at least in Judge Ratcliffe's decision, if there is some yield-bearing instrument here or protocol, that very well may be a securities offering, at least in this court's opinion. And this is where it gets dicey. Interestingly, in the case of UST, Judge Ratcliffe did not find that UST in isolation was an investment contract. As a stablecoin, its nature would not inspire one to expect profits from holding it. Rather, the opinion held that UST was an investment contract when coupled with Terra's Anchor protocol, a staking protocol developed and purportedly aggressively marketed by the defendants as a means for UST holders to deposit, pool their tokens for lending to third parties, with accrued interest distributed to all depositors. And the fact that many UST holders or users never planned on staking their crypto didn't matter. He wasn't looking to get into the facts of, 50% maybe didn't, and he didn't care. He said you have this mechanism coupled to it, therefore all UST is a security offering. And that's a really nasty decision. Myself, I've had UST back in the past. I use it to transact on the network there, buy different assets. It was quite novel. You didn't even need any Luna. You could just pay for your fees in UST. And so I never loaded my stuff up in Anchor. I wasn't interested in this, Ponzi-nomic scheme where you get 20% yield. I was too busy investing in stuff during a bull run when it was going up wildly. But the judge in this case didn't care about people like me that didn't use the asset for that purpose. He just blanketly called them all securities offerings. Now, is that correct? Maybe not, but we have to go back to court and argue over these issues. I'll tell you this, if you see some sort of settlement here with XRP, I don't think it's going to happen, but they may just drop that. They may say, you know what, Bitcoin, XRP, they're pure cryptocurrencies. They're digital assets that don't have this type of thing. If you see a settlement, watch out, because most people are going to think, now's our time, let's just pile in to XRP. If we have some issue like this in the broader crypto market, it could cause a lot of short-term disruption. Things like if you see an Ethereum lawsuit by the SEC, things of that nature, it could really make the price of XRP and other cryptos go down more than if you had no settlement at all. I think when we look at XRP, the SEC's cooked there. What are they going to argue? I think Judge Torres, was well thought out. It follows the current day rules, but we don't know how the courts will look at staking. And this goes on to say Judge Ratcliffe's opinion seems to make it clear that the recent, and in some instances much celebrated, Ripple Labs conclusion that certain digital assets do not qualify as a security for purchase when done on the secondary market may not be a rock on which digital asset sellers and other participants can build. So it's just not automatic. Again, it comes down to the facts and circumstances. I'm not overtly worried about this, of course. If we have Ethereum get sued or other, major cryptocurrencies out there, we're not going to see mass delistings like we saw in the past. We're already at full-on war with the SEC in a lot of ways, but it can cause a lot of problems. You can imagine if Ethereum is sued, and right now you can invest in Ethereum on Fidelity, on their platform. That will end, likely. And a lot of institutions have an investment in Ethereum. They're probably going to pull it. So it could cause a lot of short-term disruption. Doesn't really matter. Nothing's going to knock us off this course. We're going to go through a bull run. But stuff here in the short term can really zap you. The easiest play for the SEC right now is just to boot the Ripple case down the road a little bit, deal with that later. But if you see a settlement, to me that means one thing and one thing only. They're trying to clear up resources for something massive. And that might really cause a lot of disruption in the short term for crypto. Now I see this article here. 500 million XRP unlocked from Ripple's escrow. In a recent development. Yeah, it happens every month, people. Ripple has withdrawn a substantial sum from its escrow accounts, according to a report by Well Alert. The company unlocked 500 million XRP earlier today. Look, when this escrow was originally devised, it, I guess, gave the market some assurance that they weren't just going to dump all their coins. But no one else did this. And no one else is this transparent. And every single month we're hit upside the head with this FUD about 500 million XRP being unlocked. It's just constant and never-ending bad press. I think it was a bad move in the first place. Look, the Ethereum Foundation, they hold Ethereum. Charles Hoskinson, maybe under different entities, they hold Cardano, the ADA token. Every altcoin has someone at the center with a heck of a lot of coins. They don't broadcast it, they don't mention it, and they're better off for it. They need to figure out something here, and I don't know what to do. They can change, the escrow here. They say they can't. It's computer code. We can do whatever we want. If we're all in agreement, we could unlock it, and they could, send it over to a foundation or another third party or something. But I'm just tired of this all the time, this nonsense FUD. They just write articles the first of every month, and it doesn't even mean they're necessarily selling it. And it definitely doesn't mean they're selling it any more than their counterparts. Let me know what you think down below. Do they got to do something here? Because it seems to me this is just constant bad press when it's just a bozo move to lock up that XRP, I feel. Granted, when they did this, XRP was only 0.6 of a cent, and they were just trying to give assurances, and it seemed like a good idea, and I've argued in the past it was, but it wasn't. They need to do something. And again, if they don't want to mess with the underlying code of that escrow, because that would cause people to panic, even though we all know it's software code. I don't think anyone would be against Ripple redesigning how they deal with this. Then have those escrows go to someone else other than them to be distributed out. They got to do something here because it's just nonstop FUD and it just won't go away. Charles Hoskinson. He stopped by an XRP Spaces. I thought I had a really good conversation. But he made this point about Bitcoin, and I'll tell you this. It applies to XRP all the same as Bitcoin and pretty much anything that predates these Generation 3 blockchains. He said, look, with Generation 3 blockchains, things like Cardano, things like Polkadot, etc., the newer stuff, the more advanced chains out there, each iteration of blockchain, pulls from the past and just improves. So you take, Bitcoin's ability to send payments without a trusted third party, and XRP's ability to do so fast and cheap. And you take Ethereum's programmability, and now with Gen 3 you have more scalability, and you also have governance. You look at something like XRP, what governance? And so it's his opinion that these new next generation blockchains encompass everything the past did, but just better. And again, that wouldn't just apply to Bitcoin, it would apply to XRP and pretty much everything else that predates the current batch of blockchain. It is my idea that each iteration of blockchain, it adds new technology, improvements for sure, but there's also trade-offs, concessions, things you are giving up that leave value for those OGs. And I think a great example of trade-offs is Midnight. It's a privacy blockchain. And it makes it possible, though, for regulators to see, transactional details when absolutely necessary. Now, the good thing about Midnight is the fact that probably you'll be able to build this to scale and make it very successful, and it will be adopted, and the coins can probably trade on your Coinbases and stuff like this. But there's some, bad sides of that as well. The fact that, the government's really who we're worried about and who we should be worried about. They're the number one enemies of privacy, the number one people we need privacy to protect us against. Also, anytime you have a centralized figure, someone that could be shaken up by some shady agency saying, we're going to throw you in jail, we're going to shut you down, whatever, you're more susceptible to risk. And so I agree, we need a Midnight type of protocol, but we also need the OG and Monero. Different tools for different jobs. We don't want to become cheerleaders for ideology. We're investors. We want to make sure, Midnight's probably going to be very successful, and it's probably going to have a lot of scale and a lot of adoption. We want to invest in that, but we want to understand the predecessor and why it might be separated from something this compelling and why it might have value. The problem with every altcoin out there that I'm aware of, at least, is the demigod effect. The fact that, when we look at Ethereum, who controlled Ethereum? Was it the decentralized miners, or was it Vitalik and the Ethereum Foundation? Well, you saw what happened. The decentralized miners that ran the network, they were fired because the world followed those demigods, those people at the center, those people that we look at for the future, just inherently. If you're an investor in Ethereum, you probably think that, Vitalik and, Joe Lubin and all of these people, they have a vision for the future, and that's who we're going to follow to try to scale the future and make our money. And it's the same thing with Cardano or Ripple or any of these. Using Ripple as an example. You saw early days, David Schwartz, Ripple, they said, you don't need mining. We can be successful because of the public blockchain. That's really the secret sauce here. And in that case, they were right. And most crypto today is not proof of work. While everyone doesn't run consensus, again, most people are not launching a network with mining and things of this nature. They had the vision for the future, and they were correct, at least for most blockchain applications. We can also look at areas they were wrong, where they said, micropayments, that's the next big thing. That's going to be the hit. Ignore DeFi. And DeFi ran us over. You can look here more recently when they wanted to launch the AMMs, that functionality. And there was a bug. And they said, don't worry about it. It's ready to go. What did most people do? Did they listen to the people running nodes and the developers? And did they listen to the many people out there that knew what they were talking about? Or did they say, David is a demigod, Ripple is a demigod, and they know what they're talking about. Push this amendment through. They went with David because David says it was safe and it was good to go and it was ready to go, and it wasn't. There's both good and bad. We will always slant to those people at the center of these projects to follow their lead. And sometimes they're right and it pushes development forward, and sometimes they're wrong and we get smoked because of that. And so that's the thing to remember. when you have Bitcoin and you're devoid of that central figure because Satoshi went off into the psychosphere and there's no one to shake down and make you, freeze funds and clawback funds and all these features that the government will force modern day blockchains to implement, Bitcoin has its value. And this is where I think scams came up short. You have to look at functionality of blockchain and be able to say, you know what? Bitcoin will never be able to do the things that Cardano does or XRP does, and that's okay. Don't bring up ordinals and think you're going to compete with Gen 3 blockchains. It just ain't going to work. That's not Bitcoin's game, nor should it be. And as soon as you can admit that no blockchain is perfect at everything, and the fact we need Bitcoin, sound money, without any of these jokers, any of these loud demigods being able to change the rules on us, but at the same time, we need fast, scalable payments. We need advanced smart contract blockchains that can, meet the scale of the modern era. We need it as a full picture of the digital asset economy of the future. That, as an investor, is what's important to understand. It's not just about the latest and greatest technology. Of course, there's network adoption. There's fundamentals of the network that make it resilient from, different forms of attack from government and otherwise. It's not just about being fast and cheap. In some areas it is, but in others you want to build DApps and complicated things. And so every different blockchain should have a specific architecture for the task at hand. Again, different tools for different jobs. Is a saw better than a hammer? Depends on what you're trying to do, isn't it? Anthony Pompliano. Not a huge fan of his, but I'm going to play a clip here for you. He was filled in some difficult questions because the host in CNBC was like, well, you say it's an inflation hedge. Well, how could it be also a risk on asset? Things like that. I think the important thing to remember is this. Crypto is going to have many different use cases. And different people, different countries, different regions will leverage those capabilities for vastly different reasons. We look at XRP. Is it just for micropayments? Some instances, but it also can be used to load up, different value of precious metals and fiat currencies and trade them freely. XRP itself, it could be used to secure value as an inflation hedge. We can use the XRP ledger for DeFi and all sorts of exciting purposes. There is no singular answer, especially in the early days when we don't know exactly how this technology will be used. Let me play the clip. We'll come back.
On one end, it's like a risk-on situation. On the other, it's arguably supposed to be a hedge, and it's very hard for me to get around the idea it's both, though maybe you have a view that it is. Then there was the halving that's coming, so that's sort of an idiosyncratic one piece of the puzzle, but not something that's like an ongoing piece, so you could argue it is in certain ways. And then you have the ETF, which was also sort of an idiosyncratic moment in time. So put that puzzle together for us.
Yeah, Bitcoin is the most exciting asset in financial markets because of what you just described. It's this highly complex thing that everyone's trying to figure out. And I think for some people it is a risk-on asset, and for other people it is a hedge against inflation or a store of value. And so if we just look at
Can it be both?
Of course, it can be different things to different people. Right now, I think one of the most interesting parts about this is if you go and you talk to someone on Wall Street, why are they buying it? They're buying it because they want the price exposure via the ETFs. But if you go and you talk to someone maybe in a country where they actually are worried about somebody seizing their assets, they're buying Bitcoin because they literally want to make sure that they can hold on to the economic value. And so you have an asset that this is not unique just to Bitcoin in the sense of some assets serve different purposes for different people. I think Bitcoin, because of its global nature, because of the decentralization, and because it was adopted by individuals before the institutions, we're just seeing it kind of exaggerated as we watch the asset become adopted. Now, we just hit a really important milestone before the halving. We just had the highest weekly, monthly, and quarterly close for Bitcoin.
Right.
And so the last 4 times that that's happened, Bitcoin has appreciated at least 300% through the rest of the bull market. Right. Doesn't mean it's going to happen again, but to have that happen before the halving, it's kind of like the demand shock happened. Now we're going to have the supply shock. Right. And so it's hard just to see how the price doesn't continue to go up.
I want to ask you this question, and it goes to the risk on versus the inflation hedge. So I just got back from South Africa. Mm-hmm. And I literally asked anybody who was around when I was in Zimbabwe, in Zambia. By the way, the rand has done terribly. Of course. Right? It had been inflated away. Horrific situation. And I would ask anybody who was around, very wealthy people, folks who are middle class, folks who are at the bottom of this. And I said, do you own any Bitcoin?
Yeah.
Almost to a T, they said no. That actually was not a thing. And this was, and by the way, it wasn't a scientific study, but a lot of people I asked about Bitcoin because I thought that the conversation we have around this table is that somehow the unbanked and everybody who's in these countries that is struggling with inflation is buying Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And they're, at least from what I saw, they're not. And then I went to look at the flows, and it also is true that they're not.
Yeah.
The math does not suggest that the hedge argument on inflation is actually a real one, and I just wonder whether it's sort of used to sort of sprinkle fairy dust to other people who then are speculating. I think there's a lot of people out there that are speculating and want it obviously to go higher, and it's a risk-on asset. That's my take on it at the moment.
Yeah, so I think it depends on what country you go look at, and I'll give you kind of two examples, one that supports yours and one that will contradict it. If you go to somewhere like Nigeria, it's definitely true that people are buying Bitcoin, and I don't know why it's happening in Nigeria and not in South Africa, but we see that. Then if you go somewhere like Argentina, there are some people buying Bitcoin, but there's a lot of people who want dollar-backed stable coins, and they actually want the dollar, not Bitcoin. And so I think country by country, you're going to see different adoption of these technologies. Now, what I will say, though, is you don't have to go to emerging markets to find a reason why people want to buy this, right? If you look at the United States dollar, it's lost 25% of its purchasing power since 2020. Bitcoin is up 800% during that same time period. And so if we go back to 2020, if you remember, Paul Tudor Jones, Stanley Druckenmiller, many people came out and said, look, I think it's an inflation hedge. Now, hedges are always this weird thing where people expect you buy it and then inflation explodes the next day. But instead, what we've seen is that Bitcoin is a free market asset that trades forward looking. And so Bitcoin's rise, it's up. We have 7 straight months of Bitcoin in the green up till this past month. And so why is it going up?
And
some of it is the ETFs. Well, inflation is coming down year over year, but inflation is actually going up month over month.
It's anticipating the next easing cycle. That's what it's anticipating.
So you could argue, one, it is anticipating the next easing cycle. You could also argue the alarm bell is going off, and actually inflation is not coming down month over month. It's going up, and people see that, and they're buying Bitcoin. And so Bitcoin going up is telling us, wait a second, inflation is a bigger problem.
All right, so I think Pomp did a reasonably okay job of fielding these questions, and it's not easy. To some people, Bitcoin very well may be a storage of value, but it's tough to sell today when it's so volatile. And 1 minute you lost half your money and then it's quadrupling, and it's not a great storage of value right now, but we have to anticipate where we're going in the future as well. And I remember Stephen Thomas, the great XRP developer, also probably one of the top 2 or 3 most important Bitcoin developers back in the day. And he said, when he was talking about the network distribution of Bitcoin, he's like, you can't look today. Yes, it's all centralized in China and Mongolia, but that's not what the future is going to look like. And now we're a couple years out of that, and he was absolutely correct. I mean, we see a ton of mining going on in the United States and Europe, and it's quite decentralized compared to where we were when this almost all of it was in Mongolia and China. You got to peek into the future with all of these assets and imagine how they will be used in the future. That's our job as an investor. This is an imaginative process. Binance. They formed a board of directors for the first time, and I hate these massive companies when they just disregard general fundamentals. I mean, we saw this with FTX as well. They had no board of directors. They had no real record keeping. Like, what a nightmare. Like, Binance is so big, it should have had a board of directors a long time ago. We see Binance Holding has formed a 7-person board of directors filled with company executives and independent members. Binance CEO Richard Tang, of course, is part of the board. And the formation of the board is likely one of the most significant changes in Binance's leadership since Tang moved from the position of head of regional markets to become CEO November 2023. Former Binance CEO CZ resigned at roughly the same time as part of a settlement agreement with the U.S. And I think the biggest part of this is not the fine they paid, $4.3 billion. CZ pleading guilty so he can get some sort of punishment, whether it's house arrest or he actually goes to prison for some amount of time. And again, he only pleaded guilty to a singular count of failing to effectively maintain anti-money laundering while at Binance. But the fact that they're going to let U.S. regulators be able to peek in at their data anytime they feel like it, Binance has been the biggest name in the game for a really long time. Can they maintain that huge advantage when in the crypto space they're going to be operating similar to a Coinbase or a Kraken or someone else that plays by the rules. Will there still be that massive demand? We'll see going forward, but I got to tell you this. I've been critical of CZ many times, but he brought this to a reasonable conclusion because this could have been a massive fight, tons of risk over our head for years and years and years, and like the businessman he is, he made the deal that made the most sense for the future of Binance and for the future of crypto, and I applaud him for that. Vitalik Buterin shares the next steps for the Ethereum Purge. The Purge will induce history expiration, isn't that convenient, as of EIP 4444 to limit the amount of historical data stored. And this makes some sense to me, actually. You know, do we need to keep packing around the whole history of the chain? Maybe for Bitcoin, but for Ethereum, we need to scale. We need to keep those costs down, probably get rid of it. But my point here is they're going to expire. They're going to purge the data after a year. I don't think that's enough time. 1 year to me isn't nearly enough time. I can understand you don't need to pack around a decade of back transactions, and I get it. Holding all that data, there's a huge storage cost. You can imagine the hard drive space you need and all this stuff. But a year, that seems too low. What are they doing here? Why are they cutting it from the whole entire history of Ethereum to only a year? Now, the pruning of historical data is optional. Nodes will have the option to prune historical blocks that are over a year old. I'm sure some people will keep up full history nodes. But, I just don't think that's enough. I think we need more than just 12 months of transactions, and for all sorts of reasons. And again, this is what comes back to the trade-offs of the modern era of blockchain. We go from having the full history of the whole entire blockchain to only 12 months. Of course, I'm sure this will help them scale. It'll lower the cost of running a node, and hopefully that will lead to more decentralization. But it seems extreme to me. Half a decade, that seems a lot better than, everything other than the last 12 months. I'm going to leave you with this clip from CNBC today. And they're talking about, as we exit this tightening cycle, and it's going to happen sooner than later. Now they're saying, well, we might not lower rates for the rest of the year. I'm not buying it. I don't think they could do that if they wanted to. There's just too much debt. The government has too much debt. Households have too much debt. Businesses are going to blow up in their faces. The banking sector, commercial real estate, it's a nightmare. But let me play you this clip about a soft landing that may be much different than what we saw in 2008 and 2020 when the pandemic hit and that catastrophe. It's a difference of opinion than what I think we're staring at, but a well thought out one and presented one. I'll leave you with that. We'll discuss it on the next video. Make sure you subscribe. Only 50% of you out there watching are subscribed. Make sure you check, because a lot of my subscribers are telling me YouTube, well, they unsubscribed them. Check that out here. Let me play the exit here. Comment down below. Let me know, are we going to have a soft landing, or is there any turbulence ahead of us as we exit this tightening cycle?
Is running out of some of that spending power.
Are you expecting the onset of a recession to be violent, or just sort of very gradual and creeping and shallow?
It may be shallower than what we're used to. I think when we think of recession, we think of 2020. We think of 2008. These were major shocks that hit the U.S. economy and plunged the U.S. economy into recession. The most likely scenario for a recession in what we're seeing in the economy now is a labor market that slows, layoffs that pick up, then that story that we were talking about, that strong consumer spending story, that starts to slow down because there's just less of that ability and desire to go out and spend.
Right. So then you're in the camp that the first cut would come in June?
So we're in the camp that the first cut comes in June. I think most people are, and you can get there just on inflation slowing. That's kind of what Fed officials are guiding to now. If inflation slows down, we don't get a recession, they'll probably start hiking in June and maybe, cutting in June and maybe cut 3 times this year, 75 basis points. If we get the recession, then you could expect those rate cuts at every meeting, 125 basis points.
That's what gets you to 125.
That's right.
When would they have to start telegraphing that move or that pace sooner rather than later, or would this be a surprise in the middle of the summer?
So they're being really careful about how they talk about the pace, and I think that's smart, and they're actually using that word careful. What they're telling us now is we're going to be careful, we're going to be patient, because to Sarah's point, we're still seeing the labor market holding in, we're still seeing growth that's holding up. We had pretty strong growth to finish 2023. So right now where they are is looking at that data, figuring out what the right pace will be. If the activity data hold up, then the pace down will be slower. if the activity data weaken, then it will be faster.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we've gotten lately is we got that better look at GDP. So we ended last year even stronger than we thought we did, and partly on the back of consumer spending. Today we learned that manufacturing is reaccelerating again. So where are the recessionary signs?
Yeah, really interesting data on the manufacturing sector. You're right that we've seen these diffusion indices where you're asking businesses, are you expanding, are you contracting? They're just slightly above 50 now. So that's telling us maybe they're not contracting anymore. They're not expanding in a big way, but maybe they're slightly into expansionary territory. More important, again, I'm going to highlight it, the labor market. Where was that employment subcomponent in the manufacturing ISM? That's still below 50. And firms are actually telling us they're laying people off. So that's where we're seeing the weakness in this data.